Welcome, Life Sciences, to another new exciting life science lesson. We are on the path of plant biodiversity. Now, I know that most of you, when you hear the word plants, you start to roll your eyes, and it's not always your favorite part of life science. But I must tell you, it's the part that you can see the most. It's around you all the time, right? And you can actually do a lot with it. You can go and touch it, you can feel it, you can see it. So plants are really, really awesome. So what are we looking at? So just a quick recap from our last lesson, what we would have looked at. We started looking at this whole concept of the plant kingdom. Right? So plants are multicellular, organisms. They have chlorophyll, they can photosynthesize, right? They have got roots, stems, and leaves. And in our last lesson, we looked at the evolution of plants. We looked at the moss, bryophytes. We looked at the fern, pteridophytes. We looked at the pine cone, gymnosperms. And then we looked at, the highest order of all our plants, our angiosperms, our flowering plants. Now, today's lesson, we're going to look at a very important concept on how plants reproduce. And when we looked at the evolution of plants, we saw this whole concept of how water played a big role in reproduction in the beginning and how it started to lose its significance towards the end when we got to our gymnosperms and our angiosperms. Now, the concept that I want you to think of, we're looking at how plants reproduce. And we're going to look at two ways, that the plants can reproduce. It's either asexual reproduction or by means of sexual reproduction. Now, I want to pose this question to you. When we think of plants, I often think you guys have a concept of flowers, maybe plants, in your garden, grass or whatever. But what I actually want you to think of, and this is the most important thing about plants, is plants are food. So when we're looking at the concepts that we're going to, tease out today, the asexual and the sexual reproduction, I kind of need you to put on a farmer's hat. What do I mean by that is we're not thinking like what kind of flower I want, am I going to make my garden pretty? I'm thinking along the lines of I have got to make food. I have got to produce food. I've got to make crops. I've got to feed our country because that is what plants actually are. And the concept that we're looking at here very simply is, am I looking for something that's predictable? Do I want the same thing over and over again because I know what I'm going to produce? Or do I want the unpredictable, Do I want something new? Because with that something new, something new that's really good in my crops could come about. So that's the process I want you to think about today when we're looking at asexual versus sexual reproduction. We're looking more on the lines of predictability versus something new that could bring something really good that we haven't seen before. All right. So when we're looking at asexual and sexual reproduction, we're going to look at the concept, and then for each of them, you need to be able to, decide what are the advantages of this type of reproduction. So as a farmer, maybe, what would the advantages be to me, or what would the disadvantage? Why would I not use this process? And exactly the same on the other side for sexual reproduction. What are the advantages of sexual reproduction versus the disadvantages? Knowing, the pros and the cons for each of those. Now, there's a few new words that might come into being here. As I said to you, it's the terminology. We're going to use new words. You need to understand what they mean, and you need to know how we use them in this concept of the plant biodiversity. Okay, so we're going to start off now, and we're going to look at, as I said to you, there are two ways in which plants can reproduce. Now, please understand that some plants can use both methods. It's not necessarily a plant can just use asexual or just use sexual. Some plants are able to use both their methods. Okay, so when we're looking at that, that's the concept. Don't think that it's just going to be the one. So the first thing we need to look at is what is reproduction. Now, the concept of reproduction is to make offspring. What is offspring? It's children, if I could use it. Obviously, not in the plant sense, because that's where we're looking at. So a plant making another plant, all right, a new plant, giving rise to something new, carrying on that species, carrying on the traits of that plant. That is what we're talking about when we look at reproduction, making more of making more of the plant. So we're looking at plants. So a plant making, all right, being able to give rise to another plant. And the two ways in which it can do that is asexual or sexual. And we're going to look into those concepts. All right, so now we're going to look at the concept of asexual reproduction. And here there are quite a few terms that we're going to use that might be new. I'm going to highlight them, I'm going to underline them, right, and I'm going to explain the concept to you. Right, so let's start off kicking off with what exactly is going to be, all right, what exactly is asexual reproduction. Now, guys, we don't tend to use asexual reproduction a lot. We use the word vegetative propagation, right? And propagation just means to make something new. So when we're looking at asexual reproduction, these are the most important things. Number one, there is only one parent. Now, the lesson that we are going to look at later in the series involves the whole structure of a flower. And when we get to a flower, I'm going to quickly draw one. If we look at a flower over here, what a flower has is male and female structures. We'll look at that just now. This, when it comes to asexual reproduction, all right, that is not going to be the case. One parent, we're going to have one plant, is able to give rise, all right, to many. So you have this concept where you take away this concept of male and female, which leads us to our second point. When we have male and female give rise to a gamete. And what the word gamete means is a sex cell. All right? So what it means is that a male will give rise to a male sex cell and a female will give rise to a female sex cell. In plants, pollen is the male sex cell. In the plant, the ovule is going to be the female. But you're going to get a much greater idea of that in our next lesson when we look specifically at the flower. So what happens here is when we look at this process, this is the key word. It is mitosis. Now, you guys have probably done mitosis before, and mitosis means to make an identical copy. Right, so now I'm going to let you to start thinking this word predictable, all right? If I am going to use or undergo asexual reproduction, the process is by mitosis, and that means to make an identical copy. So if I know what I've got, all the offspring are going to be the same, which leads us to our last plant. When something is the same, we use the word a clone, right? Cloning is to make something identical. So when we're looking at the concept of asexual reproduction, it's about predictability. It's making clones. So if I have got this plant, say for example, right, with a really big, say for example, a potato, and it's a really big potato, I can take this potato and I'm going to keep making offspring because I know it's going to be a big potato. So it's predictable. I know what I'm going to get. All right, that is where the concept is of asexual reproduction. This process of mitosis, all right, of cloning, I know what I'm going to get. Now guys, you need to look at a few examples of how plants can use it. Right, first thing we're going to look at is stems. Now the two examples over here, I've given you the first one. I've said it's an onion, right, but if I have a look at this one over here, this is garlic. Right, now both of them, if you have a look over here, there's a little bud. Now what does a bud mean? The bud makes new features. You don't see anything about a male and you don't see anything about a female. And all the bud does, here's my bud, it divides by mitosis. Layer onion, layer onion, layer onion. Look at the bottom, there's a root. So it's a root. What is my stem doing? There's a bud, growing, growing, growing. Right, and what are onions, what are garlic? They are food. All right, remember this concept of food. So they don't need a male, they don't need a female in this regard. Right, what we call them, guys, this is important. It's a bulb. That's the important word. They are bulbs. They are underneath the ground and they can make new plants, all right, just by that little bud. Okay, our next example is a runner or a stolon. Now, the best example that you probably, all right, might be able to get to quite quickly is grass. I don't know if I pull out grass. So I take a piece of grass and I pull it, and not one, it doesn't come up just as one. As I pull it, a whole long thread, right? So I pull up grass and it just goes long, 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 long. Okay, that is what a runner or a stolon is. So have a look over here. Look, see, this is the plant. And what it does is it produces, basically it's a stem above the ground from the roots. And guess what? By mitosis, and what does it start to develop? It starts to develop new roots and it produces a new plant. Can you see over here? No male or no female, all right, involved in this. And grass is an example. Another one is strawberries. Right, strawberries, the lovely yummy strawberry fruit. That's also an example of it. Okay, the next one, believe it or not, guys, is bananas. Now I want you to have a look over here. This is called a rhizome. And a rhizome is an underground stem. And you would have heard this word when we did the fern. The fern had a rhizome. And what it does here, I want to look at this diagram. Just by mitosis, a little, part of the stem starts to grow. And what do I have right next to it? A beautiful new banana tree. All right, banana is an example also of how some plants can use, to reproduce asexually. Potatoes. How many of you guys, have got those potatoes that you leave in like maybe a cabinet, and the next thing you know, you go to your potatoes and look what they've got growing from them. They've got these little like things growing. And those guys are new plants. They are called little potato eyes, all right? And believe it or not, and I've actually done it, you take these, you cut the potato, and you put it in the ground, and guess what's going to happen? New potato plants. This is what we call a tuber, right? It's still a stem, and it is a tuber, right? Okay guys, and these little eyes are going to become the new potato. So by the process of mitosis, we're going to just produce new potatoes. Right, these are cuttings now. Have a look over here. I've done this lots of times before with this particular plant. Have a look at this diagram. All I did was I cut the stem and I put it in water, and guess what happened? The stem grew roots. And as soon as the roots are visible, I go and I plant in the ground. But actually, I cut out the step totally. I actually took the leaf, right, and I put it directly in the soil. And in the soil, it started to grow roots, and I grew a beautiful geranium, a cutting. Yes, I know it's not natural, but it is a way, right, in which we can reproduce. Oh, guys, now the next one are root tubers. Okay, now whereas potatoes with stems, sweet potatoes, right, a little bit more healthier than our potatoes. Sweet potatoes, again food, right, are roots. They're root tubers, and again they're going to produce these little tubers asexually by mitosis. And as I said to you again, we're going to have the food. Here is an example, all right, sometimes a sucker, right, comes out. A sucker comes out and a new plant grows. This is called the pendoering, and it's a plant, almost like a bit of a thorn tree, right, that is endemic to our country. So over there, the pendoering is an example of a tree that can actually, develop via a sucker. So that we've got bulbs, we've got tubers, we've got stolons, we've got suckers that grow out of the root. Right, the least common of them, right, is leaves. And you can this is called the Cape primrose. Right, and what we can do, not so much for food, but maybe looking pretty, we can cut the leaf and we just cut it over here and we put it into the soil, and you see what happens. New little plants are starting to develop, the roots are going to grow, and ultimately we're going to get the new plants. All of these ways done asexually. So when we're looking at asexual reproduction, predictability, right? We know what we're going to get. Okay, guys, we're going to have a quick break. I will see you in just a bit.